morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Alexander Holt, and I think some of the stuff that Mr. Wheelhouse has just mentioned I'll sort of run through. But I run a program called CivTech, which I will talk very briefly through. But first of all, who here is public sector? Okay, cool. Private sector? Academia? Okay, good to see the balance in the audience. So I'm going to plant a seed. Increments of trust. Seed planted. Okay, so as the Minister was saying, our mission is to drive daring and innovation in the public sector and so make people's lives better. Now, bar the introduction you just heard, who here knows absolutely nothing about what we do? Okay, good. It's always, again, nice to know the brief of the audience and see which way you pitch it. So, as we were saying, we're here to do two things. One is deliver better public services, and two, create economic development opportunities. And we do that through the prism of innovation. Now, one of the problems we have, who here has been involved in procurements with the public sector? Yeah, fun? Yeah. And this is the problem we have. You know, it's specs that take a year to write from our perspective, 6 months to then run the process, and 12 months to roll out. And the problem, and this applies to private as much as it does to public sector. But we might write a spec for this, and actually if we had spoken to some users, we'd actually get that, and in the end, we end up with this. And this is a common story, but that presents a problem, because in the world of fast-moving technology, be it in our environment, from subsea through to country, through to rural and IoT and urban, technology moves so fast. So that presents us with a problem, because how can you procure what you don't know exists? And that's what CivTech is about. Now, it's going from writing stuff like this to actually going out to the market with that. So, but you know, what's the law? What's the legislation around? Well, you find that actually the legislation and the rules and there's guidance. And the legislation is actually quite flexible. What you find is you put rules around it which make it inflexible, and the guidance bears no resemblance to the actual legislation. So the lesson that we learn as a program is actually understand the law before anyone hits you with the rule. So how CivTech works is we take a whole bunch of public sector challenges. So these might be environment, health, cyber, transport, tourism, and we group them together. So we work with challenge sponsors, and we group them together to then go out to the market and make ourselves accessible to anyone. Literally anyone can come and apply. We then run a shortlisting process where we pay people to pitch. Who here from private sector has been paid to pitch? Yeah, that's the point. So what could the public sector do that the private sector doesn't? Which is actually value people's time and expertise, and I know this from my own company, where actually we can actually pay people and you get a better quality pitch as a process. We then put them through a 4-month accelerator program, a hardcore, proper accelerator program, 40 workshops of business, product, and personal development, where we work with citizens, work with challenge sponsors, get input from the innovation centers to then develop products. But accelerators, that's fine, all very well, unless, of course, you have a path for contracts that come out at the end. So we're not interested in grants. Grants are worthless. This is about contracts to then go global. And that's what we see from some of our companies already. So this is the feedback we've had on the program so far in terms of leading example of applied challenge approach and a role model for public sector innovation. So kind words the Minister referring to the interest around the world is absolutely pertinent. So we work with a number of organizations across the piece, and this is the advantage, and as we'll come on to where blockchain fits into this, is that we actually work across the public sector as opposed to just with central, which gives us a good overview of the public sector landscape. So, as an example, when SEPA comes to us and say, how do we prove our flood warning capabilities, we have Gary from the Maker community 3D printing his flood warning capability the night before the pitch. And a year on, he's now doing multiple community rollouts and has got multiple contracts with SEPA. Someone who would never been able to get through the procurement process. So when it comes to working with NSS, and I'm really pleased that Jonathan Cameron from NSS is here today, working with one of the companies on how do you visualize the data, and WallScope have a solution that takes disparate data sources, pulls it all together in multiple layers and data lakes, and visualizes it. So that then leaves us with this option. And the approach we took with this was that of the basis of the success, we were saying, well, why don't we go out with a wild card and say, give us a good idea in a particular area? And so we went this time last year and got a number of entries for this. But we were really keen because we knew that blockchain was part of something. And I was absolutely determined that somewhere along here we would get this coming through. And Wallet.Services presented their concept of blockchain as a service and their platform through the Sticker platform, which is an opportunity for the redesigning of services, making it safer and securer. And so they worked with some of our colleagues in the Digital Directorate to run through a prototype around licensing proof of concept. But that sparked quite an interesting conversation within the Digital Directorate and the government wider. Because when you've got a company like this and the founders who clearly have experience elsewhere and they sort of, okay, this is interesting. And I know they are not the only blockchain company. There are others, absolutely. But the conversation that sparked in government was then in relation to the digital strategy. I'll come back to that slide later about problem solution. So this was launched in March. And there's a specific commitment there around exploring potential new and emerging technologies such as blockchain. And that was absolutely key. And there was a lot of internal stuff of, right, should we put this in, should we put it in? It's like, get it in there. This is our opportunity to show how the public sector can absolutely be at the forefront of developing these technologies and act as first clients. So that went in, which then led to an opportunity. Once you get something like that in the strategy, then it gives license to experiment. And so then we went to market with this requirement around sort of looking at how do we formulate some sort of blockchain strategy, looking at what's happening domestically, what's happening internationally, putting that all together and looking at use cases, and then seeing what's being done overseas and how does that transpose to the services we run here. And then seeing what other public sector and private sector partners that we could bring into the equation. So that's something that actually Wallet.Services won the tender through Digital Marketplace. Are companies on Digital Marketplace, G-Cloud? Is anyone on G-Cloud or Digital Marketplace? Okay, so as a tip for procurement, you should get on that as well as obviously being signed up to PCS. Everyone signed up to PCS, Public Contract Scotland? Yeah. So, and then out of that will come some sort of action plan. Now here was something interesting. So last week, I don't know if anyone, just week before us, saw this, but this was the Declaration on e-Government, which the heads of state signed up to. And this poses some interesting questions, because it's around, there's a number of things that come out of it, but one is around once-only input for public services. So that's where that any citizens across Europe should only be inputting their services, their information once. And that should be pulled across to then verify according to the service they're trying to access. And that's across border. So it's looking at actually not just within individual countries, but across the European Union. Now, of course, we understand that there are implications with Brexit and where that fits in with us here. And the third thing was around, this is I consulting my notes because I want to get this accurately. Yeah, was in terms of the kind of self-sovereign of data. And actually, it's where citizens own the data. So these are profound changes which are going to affect the public sector. And of course, to those in the blockchain community, this is manna from heaven in terms of potential applications technologies. So we don't know where this is going, but we know we need to be part of it. And I think that's the key message, that if you take away the Scottish Government's aspiration for this is about doing stuff about it. And seeing the opportunities and being open and receptive to right, how do we actually transform our services? So to very shortly wrap up, this is about being smart, it's about being disruptive. It's about doing things in a far more effective way that delivers far better value for ultimately for citizens, and that's what we're aiming for. So, two final thoughts. I think it's key is around actually, enough talk. Lots of people write papers on innovation and stuff. Actually, let's get on and do stuff, because we have absolutely an opportunity here, and we either take the view, well, we can lag, we can play catch up, or we can lead and leap. So the message I want you to take away today is that we are absolutely game for doing stuff here. And we are looking, we'll see in terms of the research and over the next 6 months how that pans out. Because it's going to happen. And I want you guys to know that actually, we're absolutely up for this. So, thank you very much. And I'm going to hand on to Peter Ferry now. Thank you.
So, thank you very much, Alexander. And thank you very much, Minister, for your excellent introduction. We're really thankful in Wallet.Services for the opportunity we had to work with Scottish Government. I say it's simple, but I've managed to break it already. There we go. That opportunity was the CivTech Cybersecurity Challenge. And that allowed us, as a startup company, now just a year old, based in Codebase in Edinburgh, to take some pivotal technology and apply it to quite a fundamental problem in public services. And today I'm going to tell you really what that problem was, where we see the distributed ledger technologies and blockchain in particular fitting in. We'll talk about some of the use cases that we are seeing as we carry out our commission for Scottish Government across Scottish Public Services. And then just go on to say how we think that digital public services can move to be natively digital to realise some of the ambitions that were recently articulated in that Tallinn Declaration of E-Government. So that's our plan. Just before I get started though, it's a year since ScotChain17, so quick show of hands. Who was here last year? So actually a small minority of the audience. I mean, it's been a wild ride since then, hasn't it? There's been a lot happening in the past year that Wallet.Services have been going. We've seen the whole initial coin offering phenomenon grow from the FAT protocol movement to become some kind of bizarre crowdsourcing for arbitrary ideas. That's all been very interesting. We've seen tenfold growth in Bitcoin since then, and the value of Bitcoin. We, in Wallet.Services, we were there at Construct in San Francisco when the whole SegBit debate was happening, which has subsequently happened on that public blockchain. But I think more importantly for the discussion I'm going to have today, we've also seen the blockchain consortia actually legitimizing these technologies across the enterprise and in government. And I should really call out the support in Scotland we've had from Michael Young of MBN, because really that community and the fact that we have 300 people here today is really down to a lot of the support which he's given through the blockchain meetup community and in actually organising this event today. So my personal thanks to him. So I'm Commercial Director of Wallet.Services, and what we do is we build the blockchain integration to help you guys make the magic happen. That's our business model. And our vision is all around the simplicity and bringing the security and efficiency into digital life, particularly in public services. Because, you know, the internet promised this many years ago, but the digital natives like Iona, who interviewed the minister for her Blockchain Beyonce blog just a few moments ago, these digital natives will be middle-aged shortly. And even now, digital life is still incredibly complex. We're still living in a world that's all about wet signatures on pieces of paper and about utility bills being sent in to prove our identity. We live in an analog world where often digital services in government and in finance are really just the web page lipstick on the paper process pig. And it's incredibly frustrating for us, and that's really what got Wallet.Services started on our use case. So this doesn't make sense because the technology's actually been around for a generation to address some of these situations. Digital signatures are accepted all over Europe and have been for some time. And we expect banks and governments and the companies that we work with to protect our information and to keep us safe. But really that's not the way that it works. We still have a situation where they don't seem to be able to identify and transact with us securely or deal with our information on our behalf securely. So we live in a dangerous world. And I'm sure I'll not be the first person to mention today that risk is now a reality. And things like the Equifax hack that we became aware of some months after its directors started selling their shares, I hasten to add, where they lost 150 million driving license numbers and a lot of the personal private details of anybody who's ever had a gas bill or a BT bill in the UK. You'll be aware of the situation that Yahoo mentioned a few weeks ago, where they suddenly realized they'd actually lost the private details of 3 billion users, not just 1 billion as they'd previously thought. And closer to home, we had a situation where the WannaCry exposure actually destroyed public health data right here in Scotland. So why is this still happening in our digital age? Well, we think it's because of a problem where we're not able to share information openly, privately, and securely. That's the fundamental issue here. Our information can be duplicated, it can be stolen, it can be changed. There's no integrity. And when you look at what regulators are doing in finance and government, they recognize that the technology is not quite there to solve the conflicting problems, the balance between privacy and security, and the openness and accountability that we require in markets. The reason for that is because we're actually working to a model in the internet where we surrender personal details and sensitive information to providers. They might be governments, they might be businesses, and that information is duplicated even across government. Some people think that we need to be sovereign over this information, as Alexander alluded to. I know Ross may say a little bit about this in just a moment, and how we can protect our identity. So all of this actually means that we can't share information effectively across these boundaries between the walled gardens of data on the internet. And that actually creates a lot of paper. That's the reason behind these paper-based processes. I realized this in trying to create a company here in Scotland when I had to create a company, register as a director, open a bank account, connect with the local enterprise agency. This created a sheaf of paper and continually proving and rekeying my identity and entering information into different web pages and filling in paper forms. But the same sort of situation exists if you want to rent a flat and apply for housing benefit. And don't get me started on voting and how paper-based that is. And in fact, Bill may say a little bit about that later on. I know he's got a good example of that that he went through recently. So even when services are online, they're sometimes still just web front ends on unchanged processes that have existed for many years, and our data is still not safe. It can be lost, stolen, and destroyed. So our life is still very complex and unsafe. But potentially, distributed ledger technologies and their blockchain variant are a solution to this problem, because they can address the storage and the transaction and the protection of our data, but at the same time avoid the duplication of it and the overexposure of the information. So we're able to use advances in smart contract technologies and integration through oracles to enable disclosure without exposure of our information. We can prove we're old enough to drink without necessarily giving away our date of birth and showing our passport. Crypto is actually the root here. Blockchain is the vehicle which allows cryptographic technologies to do their work, and you'll hear more about that from Scotland's King of Crypto in just a moment. We can potentially turn our internet data model inside out. We can encrypt and permission our data and distribute it for resilience against attack. And that is the opportunity to create a tool here that can create truly natively digital systems, which is what we've tried to work with Scottish Government on. So I want to say now a little bit about how we see this rolling out moving forward. Right now, where we are in 2017, these technologies are being used to trial and test many different use cases right across fintech, govtech, regtech, public services, financial services, supply chain. There's lots of experiments going on. And we've seen recently the enterprise blockchain platforms like Hyperledger really accelerate forward. We've seen Ethereum catch the developer's imagination. We've seen things like Coda starting to be used in real use cases, and I think we'll have a speaker from Royal Bank who'll say a little bit about that later on this afternoon. And really what's next up is that government organizations and enterprises will start to create their own special purpose blockchains. They'll select the technology to match their use case based on performance and transparency and privacy requirements of whatever application they're working on. Because things like commercial interbank lending is a different scenario than Uberizing self-provided care in public services in Scotland. So the different tools have different characteristics. And at first, these will interconnect our business systems, and they'll complement the existing systems that we have in digital life. But ultimately, it'll just become knitted in as an invisible technology in the internet that we use to architect systems in public services and the enterprise. And really, that's our project in Wallet.Services. We're working on our supernode technology, which ultimately we will open source parts of to let organizations build these real-world applications across the blockchain frameworks and integrating with their existing and legacy systems like CRM and ERP and internal databases. So why will this happen in public services, in governance? And in fact, why will it happen right across the piece of regtech and govtech and fintech? There's some common patterns here. For example, when we need that security and confidentiality, we can apply the same governance of value that we have in Bitcoin to the governance of data. In streamlined paper-free processes, such as Wallet.Services have applied it to, and that becomes particularly important as you see the plans in the Tallinn Declaration to actually enact these sorts of transactions cross-border, and also important as we have services which we'll need to deliver cross-border over the next 2 years as the UK leaves the EU. Also, whenever we need to benefit from transparency and demonstrate that we are complying to regulation, these are really the core use cases that we are seeing as we identify our work in Scottish Government. So I want to use an example which is a bit closer to home and tell you a little bit about what Wallet.Services did as part of the CivTech Cybersecurity Challenge. We built a proof of concept application that we delivered back in January and that we are now using as the basis of a product that will move forward and release as SICA, which is Old Scots for Trusted and Sure, early next year. Our scope was actually pretty broad. We applied this to situations around applications and validations and checks and regulation in financial services and government. Specifically in Scottish Government, we applied it to permits and certificates and licenses, anywhere where we need to prove we're authorised to do something or apply for a product like a grant. These are the sorts of situations that occur everywhere in digital life and cross from government into commerce. Situations like when you need to enter a country and have a visa, when you need to show that you're a licensed taxi driver, or maybe when you need to apply for a mortgage on a house that you have to prove that you own. These are all the situations in life that have contracts and paperwork and lots of regulation. So we were lucky enough, as Alexander mentioned, to work with a group of subject matter experts in Scottish Government, and we built a solution that could potentially apply across the 180 different agencies of Scottish Government who administer licenses and permits, often at significant cost, I should mention, sometimes up to £100 per licence. We provided a system where the actual records were stored as natively digital objects in a blockchain store, and then provided the mechanisms that could test those proofs, for example, the possession of a license, to allow licenses to be enforced, but without disclosure of sensitive information. Again, back to that disclosure without exposure concept. So we actually worked on the example of an air weapon license application because it was a cross-agency situation that involved the council, the police, potentially the health authority involved in mental health background checks. And we delivered a system where the cross-agency status of the applications was public for transparency, but the sensitive data was completely private and protected and self-sovereign for the citizen. Turns out that this is actually a very common area of cost and concern for international governments, particularly in less developed nations. And I'm delighted to say that we've just returned from Washington, where we received an award for SICA at the International Monetary Fund from the Citibank Technology for Integrity Challenge. So I'm not sure what PowerPoint's done to my fonts there, but what I want to tell you about is just to come back to our Scottish Government Commission and how we are working with a group of Scottish Government agencies that we've identified, spanning the spectrum of public services around record keeping, health, social care, revenue and benefits, to identify these use case focus areas with international input. That work's just started, and we'll deliver our recommendations at the beginning of next year. But I want to really tell you a story about where these services could go and what a natively digital country and government services could be. Now, we've mentioned an example twice already from the previous speakers of Estonia, which I would classify as a natively digital nation. Its government have built internet connectivity as a human right. They've architected systems to manage identity and integrity of systems of citizens' data. Interestingly, they make it available to business so that businesses and all of the government departments benefit. When you go over there, it's possible to form a company in minutes and complete your tax return in, well, maybe seconds actually. And unlike here in Edinburgh, you don't have to take time off to renew a parking permit. Everything from cradle to grave is pretty much digital, from registration of birth through schooling, through applying and administering a pension, through to death registration. And they save millions compared to our spend, which is, according to Audit Scotland, £140 per person every year on IT systems just in the devolved government of Scotland. People are generally in control of their own sensitive information, and they can control who can access it and know when it's been accessed. And interestingly, it's germinated a tech sector, which is probably within the next few years will be worth 10% of their GDP, starting from pretty much nothing. And they take cyber resilience so seriously that a couple of years ago, they actually successfully failed over the operation of state from Estonia to other locations in their data embassy project. It's no nirvana or brigadoon. This already exists. But interestingly enough, it's all based on technology that was available back in 2002, an identity-based smart card, X509, a standard cross-government information exchange framework. And I really wonder what we could do here using the technologies that we will hear about today. What could we do? The opportunity is huge. I think, of course, the difficulty is in leadership and law and all of the culture to adopt some of these things, but the technology is there. Distributed ledger technologies are now in their infancy. But I think as MBN's survey, which they published today, shows, business are really getting behind it, and we now have an opportunity to really make this count. So I'll look around the audience today, and we've got all of the talents represented here in the local community in Scotland. We have a track record in cyber with universities and startups and security operations centres. We have global leadership in some areas, like in healthcare provision, where this technology can apply. And we've got a Scottish brand which has provenance in finance and in law, And I think we've got a pretty damn good tech startup environment here in Scotland too. And there's world-class institutions that we can bring together around this technology. So my call to action for today is to, if you're a business, be daring, follow what Alexander was telling you about that we can see happening now in the Scottish public sector, and build your blockchain use cases. Do come and talk to me in the break about that. Let's get our institutions organised around this opportunity. It's not just fintech, it's about a broad sweep of technology that we can really take a step forward in. And let's be about action, not words. And for once, let's not just try to catch up with the leaders, but maybe use this to leapfrog and become the best in the world. So digital life is complex, but it needn't be. Let's try and do natively digital here in Scotland. Thank you very much.